Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Primary Care Podcast. This is your boy, Dr. Mark List. Before we get into today's episode, we're going to hit the primarycarepod@gmail.com inbox to talk about a joke that somebody sent me. Hey, Dr. List, with all the vaccine COVID talk, did you know that Eminem, the rapper, has started his own vaccine company? Oh, that's actually pretty interesting. Apparently Eminem, the rapper, has started a vaccine company. You only got one shot. Okay, that was really, really bad. I guess the side effects probably include vomiting mom's spaghetti, maybe knees weak, arms are heavy. I don't know. Okay, let's start the podcast. That was terrible.
The Primary Care Podcast is written and edited by a family physician for an audience of other physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, residents, and medical students interested in primary care topics. This is not a podcast for patients and should not be used as medical advice. This is also a personal podcast produced on my own time and solely reflecting my personal opinions. Statements of this podcast do not reflect the views or policies of my employer, past or present, or any other organization with which I may be affiliated.
Thank you for listening to the Primary Care Podcast. I'm Dr. Mark List, here to bring you the latest news, guidelines, and updates from primary care sources around the globe. Keeping it under 15 minutes long because you're in a hurry and I'm not that smart. All right, everybody. Welcome back. I'm still reeling at how terrible that joke was. Oh my great googly moogly. Woo! All right, so I'm currently doing this podcast in my office at work. Over my lunch break, I was supposed to be making a training video for a new EMR update for our system, but the test system is down, so I can't make that training video. So I'm making a podcast episode. I didn't have anything. I got a couple of things on the back burner, but I was reading this article this morning, and I thought this was a really fascinating take. This is not clinically relevant to you at all. I just think it's really interesting to me, and I really enjoyed this topic, so hopefully you do too. And it is maybe more relevant clinically in the future in our practice. Depends on how important this type of travel becomes. But the article is from Ars Technica, and it says, and the article is it's based on a scientific article. But the article says, we don't know why, but being in space causes our bodies, or causes us, to destroy our blood. And space anemia is the title of the article. And so for those of you who don't know, space travel is associated with numerous effects on the human body. The one that's been most studied for the longest amount of time is osteoporosis, right? For every X% of time that astronauts are in space, they lose bone density at a pretty significant rate. Because we don't have the artificial gravity we don't have gravity that causes us to use our bones or to have weight bearing, which is really, really, really important for bone development and growth. Now, the more interesting thing, so that's been around forever, and hopefully they figure that out. That's why they're starting to have astronauts run on treadmills in space and use some resistance training in space to try to have that artificial gravity. But artificial gravity also does a ton of other things to the human body, which are really interesting. So you may or may not know, but when a human being goes up in space, 10% of their volume, their circulatory volume in their blood cells, is actually redistributed. And this process is likely due to gravity and lower resistance at the level of the capillaries. And so the blood volume actually is distributed to the tissues, and also, so not only gets pushed away from the central vascular system into the tissues, but in a very intuitive direction, also goes up to the head, right? Because when you and I are staying upright, obviously we don't have any swelling in our face or our head because the blood's all closer, down to our legs, and gravity keeps it down out of our brain. But in space, you get a significant increase in intracranial pressure, for example. They call it spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, where that increased pressure on the skull can cause temporary hearing loss, brain edema, and some changes to the eye, so you might look different. It also, that change in the pressure where the blood volume is distributed also then affects even things like the heart shape, right? So our hearts are oval shaped, kind of, the size of a fist, whatever, in the middle of our chest. And the way that the kinetic engineers describe it as, it's like if you take a water balloon, right? And instead of water, which our heart, it's smaller chambers at the top, bigger chambers at the bottom, and it looks like a water balloon kind of filled with water. suddenly you change that water balloon to an air-filled balloon. So you get more of a rounded appearance where the atrium are bigger, and on par with some of the ventricles, or more similar to that, and the blood volume distribution significantly gets altered. That also then impacts muscles, and so obviously things don't work quite as well. But on return to Earth, gravity again pulls the blood into the abdomen and the legs. And so in combination with that loss of blood volume and then atrophy of the heart, atrophy of the blood vessel, smooth muscle, atrophy of some of the other body muscles, astronauts, when they come back, oftentimes experience significant orthostatic intolerance, right? So basically like some of your POTS patients, your postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome patients, a lot of astronauts experience that same type of syncope, near syncope, difficulty standing, difficulty exercising, difficulty tolerating changes to their vascular volume. So these are all well-known and well-documented changes. But this article is from 2019. This is not the article I read, the title, but the article that from Ars Technica in the popular media is based on this scientific research called Characterizing the Effect of Exposure of Microgravity on Anemia, that more space is worse. And basically they found that if you have your patients or people go on these short-term space flights. So we saw this with, Amazon. We saw this with, this new age of like, oh, we're going to briefly go up into space, do a low Earth orbit and then basically come back. It's a really short flight. As space tourism becomes more of a thing, these shorter flights do see some of this movement of vascular volume. Okay, but because of that, you actually get increased hemoglobin concentrations significantly in short cases. The effect is even bigger if that duration of the spaceflight is less than 5 days. You can get a 1.0 change in your hemoglobin just from that change in the volume distribution. Even on intermediate flights of like 2 weeks, you can see 0.5 point of hemoglobin increase. But what's really fascinating is how the human body basically adapts to very long space flights. So space flights that are 3 to 6 months in length, you actually get a significant drop in your hemoglobin. And again, that makes sense, right? If you have decreased vascular volume, you don't want that hemo concentration, which can be associated with blood clots and a bunch of other things. So I think that, the human body adapts. And interestingly, you don't see these effects short term. So it's not directly impacted by EPO or by erythropoietin production of red blood cells, because that's a 7-day course, right? From EPO affecting, creating new blood cells. That's only a 7-day process. What is likely happening is either an increase in turnover, right? Or a decrease in production. But we don't see a decrease in production initially. We see a large amount of hemolysis, right? So you actually have an increased rate of hemolysis. So in this study, basically they looked at this researcher in Canada who's a PM&R doctor but specializes in space medicine, which is a really, really niche field, I guess. But basically looked at carbon monoxide production. So they had these astronauts breathe into a can and seal the can and then bring it back when they were done with their space flight. And it looks like there's a ton of basically hemolytic anemia happening in space. The stat they throw out is that on Earth, the average human body destroys, kind of turns over 2 million red blood cells every second on Earth. But in space, based on these calculations, we now think that astronauts destroy 3 million red blood cells every second. So there's a massive amount of hemolytic anemia. And why this matters is this research is really interesting for many, many reasons, mostly because I'm a huge nerd and I enjoy this, but also what this could mean with the future of space travel, space tourism. If we end up having colonies, there's a whole lot of people that might be impacted by the increase in hemolytic anemia. We also see a dramatic drop for longer astronauts or longer space flights, whereas patients come back to Earth. They have persistent and long-lasting anemia following this kind of quote-unquote space anemia, which turns out is actually a type of hemolytic anemia. So interestingly, you can drop all the way, a week or two after your space flight. If you've been up there 3 to 6 months, you can almost lose like 2 whole grams per deciliter of hemoglobin compared to pre-flight, just based on being out that far in space and the changes that your body undergoes. So this also matters if we start talking about longer space flights. We're talking about sending manned missions to Mars, etc. Like the longer that people are in space, we might need to start having this, this might end up being more of an issue for human beings traveling. Regardless, this isn't clinically relevant, but some of this research that they're doing does have clinical value, right? Number one is, how does this affect, we can learn more about how certain conditions can affect the human body, how the process of initiating this hemolysis or then restarting the production of hemoglobin afterwards could impact human bodies. Number two is how microgravity or loss of any gravity impacts the human body, not only from a bone density standpoint, and then how we can then use this to maybe our benefit in kind of treating patients here on Earth, or again, for future space flights. And then number three is, I just find it really fascinating. And hopefully then there's also then discussions about how this could impact our patients with POTS, patients with syncope that's related to some of these factors. So regardless, I think that there's really no clinical benefit, but I really do think that I personally enjoy reading these things, hearing more about them. I hope that this was a good distraction from maybe your local COVID surge, your Omicron surge. Hopefully this is a fun learning topic that you also enjoy. But most importantly, I hope that wherever you are and however your clinic and your healthcare organization is dealing with this Omicron surge, we here locally are just getting absolutely dump trucked by an increase in cases and volumes in the clinic. I know hospital volumes here in the next week or two are supposed to go up dramatically. I hope wherever you are that you can have time for things that are fun and things that take your brain away from the stress of clinic. And I wish you guys nothing but the best, and I thank you all for listening. And hopefully this podcast is helpful to you. Hopefully it distracts you from life, but also improves your ability to think about the human body and practice medicine and be a good family practitioner, or a primary care provider, wherever you are. So again, thanks for tuning in this week. Next week we'll be back with a normal topic, but again, at my desk, and I had half hour to kill that I was supposed to be doing some training videos, so I thought a podcast was appropriate. So thanks everybody. Have a great week. Bye.